he is playing absolutely into the longer game of Xi Jinping, who is really the controller of Putin. And what is very worrying is the churning around militarily, whether it's on Greenland, whether it's on Venezuela and the Caribbean and the Middle East. If Xi makes good his pledge that I might have to use force to retake Taiwan, we're in a very dangerous window now. I think that if he's going to do it while he is the leader in China, the supreme commander, as well as the chairman and president, he'll go very, very soon.
Hi, I'm Jo Crawford and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I'm joined by Robert Fox, defence editor of The Standard and contributor to The Eye and Independent. Thank you for joining me today.
Hello.
So tell me, Robert, what did you make of Trump's speech at Davos yesterday?
Rambling, not a surprise. I think it's important for a number of reasons. I mean, that goes without saying, because there was a lot of hype on all sides. Was this the end of the world of NATO as we know it? Was Trump going to war on a NATO ally in order to get Greenland? That was over the top. What I do think, it was a characteristically rambling performance, and I think, show my hand here, I think we've reached peak Trump. I think he's, as the psychologists say, he's showing waning powers. And I think this is one of the reasons why we did see a step back, that I'm not going to use force and let's discuss it, and that I'd got a deal. He just couldn't afford to go on with his path of confrontation against allies and at least mollifying actual and potential enemies.
And when you say that he couldn't actually go on, he didn't have the backing behind him, could you elaborate on that?
He didn't have the backing at home. I think that's the most interesting thing. He's losing it for such aggressive policies in Congress, and the Speaker of the House has been quite strong on that. I don't think he's winning it in the country, because the bit that we haven't looked at is that the polls are not good for him. The faithful people, a lot of people who voted for him, don't feel that he is making their lives any better off, and that's the crucial thing. So they don't like the bluster about wars here, there, and everywhere. I also think that the Nobel Peace Prize talk that I've solved 8 wars or whatever it is washes very much anymore. With Trump now, and he's a year in, he's probably got about a year or two of effective power left. It's the obvious cliche, there are more questions than answers. I think, too, we have to add to that he has overestimated America's military power. Yes, it is the greatest military power on earth, but not by that much in areas which really count, particularly vis-a-vis China. And in terms of his claims that are contained in the National Security Strategy of last November, I think he's getting quite close to overreach in the home territory, in Cap O, Cap H, our hemisphere, in America North and South itself. He's making too many potential foes and who could become actual foes.
Do you think he was surprised by the fact that Europe doubled down on supporting Greenland and standing up against him?
The former National Security Advisor on Ukraine in Trump 1, Fiona Hill, who has also been one of the architects of the British Strategic Defence Review, and she is absolutely clear. What matters to Trump is what matters to Trump. It's as Tom put it this morning in the New York Times, not making America great again, it's what makes Trump great again. And I think that is quite worrying. He's still got his inner cord. He's still got his MAGA supporters who use this and wave it around. And I think that you can layer them in 2 layers. One is Stephen Miller and J.D. Vance, who really are the architects of whatever it isn't a national strategy, of the national strategy document. It's a puke out, as the American publishers say. It's an absolute spiel of what Trumpomania wants, and it's where it spends more time criticizing allies, particularly Europe, about which those two have a mania, Miller and Vance, and know very, very little indeed. Their ignorance is quite spectacular. But let me give the second layer. The second layer is the flatterers in media land, or associated, namely people like Steve Bannon, very important, and Tucker Carlson. What friends like Jim Naughtie, spending a lot of time in America, is saying the thing that is spectacular, going back and forth across the Atlantic, is how deteriorated confidence in public values is in the United States, and they find that quite frightening. Now, that's part of the Trump package. I don't know what comes next, but I think that we're on a glide path down. He won't be able to do a lot of the things that he says he'll do. And do watch his peace board, because that's an extraordinary. It's like Bart Simpson on a skateboard, because in practical diplomacy and international politics today, it's a fantasy. It's a cartoon.
And in this apparent U-turn from Trump on Greenland, he's announced this framework deal for the entire Arctic region. He spoke with the NATO Secretary General, Mark Rutte, and Rutte didn't give much detail into what this conversation involved. But what do you think this framework deal means? What does this mean for Greenland as well?
Joe, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves there, and I think the commentariat has. It's nowhere near as concrete as it sounds. It's a thought bubble. This is what's come up. And I think that this is where you should listen to Mark Rutte, but you should also listen to Ursula von der Leyen, and you should look to Kaja Kallas too, who seem to be much more realistic about this. And not that they have an Arctic interest, but a NATO interest. It's funny, it's women that are very strong, very thoughtful, very clear-sighted women. That Giorgia Meloni seems to have got a grip on Trump that a lot of others haven't. Get realistic about what the alliance is doing and what it cannot do. The plan is, they've got a formula, they've got a form of words, and it's an Arctic bastion. Now, this fits with the concept of the Atlantic bastion, whereby you have defences or surveillance arrangements across the Iceland-Faroes gap, which involves very much the UK, and beyond Iceland, the Iceland-Greenland gap. And now you have the Arctic bastion. Well, of course, it's nonsense, because already we have the Arctic Council, and much of the Arctic has very little to do with NATO interests. You could say, yes, remotely, it adjoins Canada and Iceland, and it is part of the sovereign territory of Denmark. That is Greenland. But Greenland isn't the whole of the Arctic. There's a very funny story about how Trump, it had to be explained how big or how relative the area of Greenland is, because he saw it on the flat Mercator projection in an atlas, and it looks enormous. But if you look at it on a globe, it's less than a quarter the size of the main continent of Africa. It's that kind of thing. Now, if you're going to talk Arctic bastion, let's look at the Atlantic Council, which is a cooperative council which was stood up mainly to protect the environment, but it's got an 8 membership plus observers. Britain is an observer, by the way, but there are core obvious Arctic countries like Canada, like the USA, like Finland, like Norway, Sweden, Russia very much, and of course China, because it's a main trade route, as they now see it, has asked to join. It says we don't want to be an ordinary here today, gone tomorrow observer. We want to be a full member of the Arctic Circle. Now, where do we fit in with Russia, which has an enormous interest and an enormous coastline on the Arctic, well above the Arctic Circle, and China come into the whole calculation of the Arctic bastion? I can't see where you would even draw the line in the map if you're going to support it. And by the way, the Atlantic bastion that is the Iceland gap and the Faroes gap, they are really doing things, and the Brits are having to do things with great reluctance. And by the way, we can get into the pantomime posture of the Starmer government, because he's talking up a storm about we're going to contribute to this, that, and the other, with completely hollowed out forces and a non-existent defence posture, which is annoying the Allies so much. But really, that is the plan. Arctic bastion. What the hell does it mean?
Do you think that there was a winner from Trump's speech yesterday? Was it that Trump's European allies managed to avoid tariffs or the threat of military force? Or is it we're going to hear China, Russia, or Trump?
Phew, we've got peace. We've avoided a war between NATO allies. It's pretty pathetic, isn't it? Actually, the best of the some really good commentary has come out about this. I do commend very, very experience from The Guardian, Julian Borger. Absolutely excellent today. Are you really saying, oh, I've decided not to go to war against Denmark? Is a triumph? A triumph from who? It's actually, if you were totally detached and not completely involved in the churn of Trumpo politics, you'd say this is pretty crazy, this kind of stuff. And the one thing, you may talk about the art of the deal, we've had a lot of the cliche coming up again because it's the title of his book. You know, he knew what the deal that he was going to do. What is the deal here? And the thing that I mentioned about the configuration of his personality and the deterioration of his performance, I'm sorry, that's observable, the deterioration of his verbal performance, is that there is no strategy. Yes, your point, Joe, is absolutely right. One of the net winners, of course, is Russia, because he's seeing confusion. Putin wants the weakening, the dissolution of NATO and Europe in that order. NATO, it's always been a big thing. It's make Russia a great again, and he's prepared to use all means, as we have seen in Ukraine, short of nuclear war. There's still a risk of that, unfortunately. And no, he's got confusion among his foes. And this is the extraordinary thing about the configuration of Trump's personality. He doesn't seem to worry about that. It's, you know, that he mollifies, and that's the thing, softens up towards Putin continuously. He's admitted that he admires him. Also, he is playing absolutely into the longer game of Xi Jinping, who is really the controller of Putin. And what is very worrying is the churning around militarily, whether it's on Greenland, whether it's on Venezuela and the Caribbean and the Middle East. If Xi makes good his pledge that I might have to use force to retake Taiwan, we're in a very dangerous window now. I think that if he's going to do it, while he is the leader in China, the supreme commander, as well as the chairman and president, he'll go very, very soon, and he may choose, for instance, around the midterm congressional elections, the time to really start things. We've got to be aware of that. We've got to be careful too about what NATO can do and can't do, and that's why, going back to what is the takeaway from the speech yesterday, is the Wednesday speech, is that NATO really does have to get its act together and not be grand and not grandstand and be quite modest about what it does. I've been in Italy over the weekend talking to a lot of shakers and movers in industry, investment, as well as security. And they say the game in town, which Ursula von der Leyen understands, and I think Merz and Macron understand, is the E3. The person who doesn't understand the full implication of that is Keir Starmer. The E3 is that the European Security Club, a bit nodding towards the EU, but basically the European members of NATO must be led by Britain, France, and Germany. Because the one thing that, again, Davos has underlined this, it's America the unreliable. You've got to be prepared to do a certain amount of things on their own. And the thing that the Germans reluctantly are coming to a difficult conclusion about is Ukraine. The Ukraine war is very much likely to go on, and it's largely got to be sustained by Europe. It's in Europe's domain. It's not in its backyard. It's in Europe's front yard, and we've got to take responsibility for that. Particularly the Scandinavians are very strong about it. Reluctantly, Maloney realizes it. Keir Starmer just hopes it'll go away.
And I'd like to hear your thoughts about the Board of Peace, because we had Trump speak at the signing ceremony today for this Board of Peace, where he claimed that everybody wanted to be a part of it. But, for example, the UK said that they weren't going to be a part of it over concerns about Putin being involved with it. Do you think that the US's European allies are putting themselves on the back foot by not getting involved in this Board of Peace? For example, if Trump is investing himself into this board, how's he going to react to his allies who aren't choosing to do so?
Oh, come on. We cannot go base policy on the personal whim of Trump. Trump is hysterical about not getting the Nobel Peace Prize, not that he was ever a candidate, as far as I could make out. What is this Board of Peace going to do? It's a bad duplicate in Trump's mind, because there is an element of the Republican Party. Dick Cheney was one at a time who absolutely hate the UN. We've seen that in the dismantling of USAID, US aid. What are they really going to do? I've delivered peace in 8 wars. Look at them. There's hardly one where peace has broken out. And the Peace Board was devised as part of the Gaza ceasefire and negotiation arrangement. And they're now struggling to get to phase 2. They can't handle Gaza, but we're going to do everything else. And you're going to pay in to my club, and I'm going to stay there, and I can hire and fire. The Starmer government, which is very hot on the law, quite rightly, and sometimes I think quite wrong-headedly, particularly when it comes to some of the worst aspects of Chagos. But it is absolutely right there to stay away from this one. I'm afraid the Peace Board is looking increasingly toxic. And again, it will be a wonderful opportunity for Putin to get leverage, to instrumentalize this, and I think that we'll do it. We'll hear a lot of this, by the way, from the Witkoff talks in Putin, which is always, particularly when he talks to his opposite number, the head of the International Trust Fund, Russian International Trust Fund, for that's his title, Kirill Dmitriev. It's Goodfellas territory. And I think, no, I'm not persuaded by the Peace Board, and it is a bit of megalomania on the part of Trump himself.
I mean, exactly on that point, do you think it raises concerns for that relationship there between the US and its allies?
Oh, it does. I mean, it's. I mean, I think the theme of our talk, Joe, really is America the unreliable. There's a lot of goodwill. There's a lot of practical cooperation still, as we say, intelligence, communications, militarily, and so on. But it doesn't mean to say you kowtow to lunacy, which is a bit of the Whitehall or the number 10 bunker thinking. No, you cannot buy Trump in the way that you cannot buy China at any price. You've got to be very, very careful. And there is coherence. That's one thing that Trump has done in the last few weeks and months, is he's galvanized Europe. There's a lot of good, hard thinking going on, and it's not size related, which is what he does. I mean, Mette Frederiksen, who's been meeting Keir Starmer today, is extremely tough. Look how powerful Callas has emerged as a figure. What I detect there is real practical thinking. There's much, much less of the usual geopolitical BS going down now with that. I think Europe is getting real. It knows exactly where it is. It knows where it is on things like climate change, on migration, on aging, aging populations. And don't think America is free of that, because that's going to be the disaster 5 years down the line if they do pursue these Trumpian America first, no foreigners, no migration policy. And by the way, that's the backside, the downside of Trump. I think he's bitten off more than he can chew in the claims in Latin America. The Venezuela operation was a success militarily in that they got their man in true high noon, but also mafioso style. But by the way, it goes back a long way. Obama even wanted to do that because it was a real nuisance, the mafia aspects of the regime in Venezuela from Chavez on through to Maduro. But he's got big problems that I don't think the alliance of Canada, Mexico, Brazil is going to roll over to Trumpian hegemony. So the world is quite a puzzle now. And Davos has underlined the nature of the puzzle.
Do you think that Mark Carney was right when he said that the old order is not coming back? I know you mentioned earlier that you think that Trump sort of reached his peak with that speech yesterday. But, you know, with this contradictory rhetoric of how he's sort of pursuing more international affairs rather than basing on that America First agenda he set out on his campaign, the polling, also, you know, the turning away of Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example. Do you think that those closest around him, Mark Rubio, J.D. Vance, figures like that are going to stand by him if he continues in this way?
Well, they've all got their problems. Vance and Hegseth and Miller would like to be the successors. They see themselves as the Dauphin. Rubio in another way, but Rubio's got a stack of problems with. He is the scion, the poster boy of Cuban expats in Florida. Cuba is a huge problem now that they've cut off the oil. It needs roughly 100,000 barrels of Venezuelan oil per day, and now it's absolutely going down the tubes. The conditions are awful, power cuts and so on, and it's right on America's doorstep. What can you do about it? Because, as I was saying, there's a lack of capacity. I mean, America, for instance, has 3.5 carrier groups. One is an amphibious marine group, 3.5 aircraft carrier groups at sea on operations. You can't keep that up forever. This really is the problem. But in true political fashion, I haven't answered your question. And your question is, there is a simple answer, though, and it's 2 letters, no. And Carney is right. We're not going back because things have changed. Where things are changing so fast. We argue about deterrence and nuclear weapons, and we're ignoring the full implications of AI, automatic weaponry and systems, the things that just run themselves, and autonomous systems that can calculate at almost hyperhuman speed and cannot be recalled. We should be addressing that. You look at the British Defence Review, it allocates only 200 million to that, and billions and billions and billions to an outdated concept of a nuclear deterrent which isn't independent, which is dependent on America. It's that kind of thing. And that's what Carney is looking at. It's very interesting how 2 outstanding bankers are making so much of the running and thinking. Mark Carney, and his opposite number is Mario Draghi. Mario Draghi is really thinking through the future of the EU, of the older Europe, as it were. But it is really dynamic thinking. And they're saying, don't go back. I think that what we're going to discover, it's so important in looking at NATO and the EU, they're too rigid. That if you have things so bureaucratically led, they are arteriosclerotic. The arteries are furring up. And you've got to be more flexible. And that's why I think, by the way, Whitehall suffers from it enormously too. It is too retro. The other thing is somebody pointed out, I think it was the great Natalie Haynes, who's a classical scholar, pointed out the other day, nostalgia isn't a nice thing. In the original Greek, it's a longing for home, a safe home place in the past, with bitterness. Nostalgia. And that's what's going on. And not for nothing, as they say, nostalgia ain't what it used to be. And I think that's what Mark is getting at, Mark Carney. We're in a completely different world. It's when you look at the shape of human population, the difficulties with the environment and movement. I mean, who is working out? I mean, this is what's so daft about the abdication of American influence in Africa to China above all, and Russia. Africa's going to be over 40% of the Earth, of the global human population within 25 or 30 years.
Robert, thank you so much for joining me on the Trump Report today.
Thank you.